What if the person standing closest to the investigation was not just a witness, not just a grieving family member, but the keeper of the one truth the police could not see yet? Because sometimes the most horrifying secret is not buried in the ground, it is buried in plain sight, behind calm voices, polite answers, and a story that almost makes sense. This is the case that began as a missing man report, and quickly turned into something far darker. A disappearance that pulled law enforcement into a web of shifting suspicious behavior, quiet lies, and one discovery that changed the entire direction of the investigation. And here is the promise of this video. By the end, you will understand how a single missing person report can expose a chain of deception, how investigators spot the difference between panic and performance, and how one small detail can crack a case wide open. Stay to the end, because the most important moment in this case is not the gunshots, not the arrest, and not even the search. It is the moment someone realizes the story they have been repeating is collapsing in real time. If you have ever felt that chill in your gut when something is not adding up, this story will feel uncomfortably familiar, because the emotional core of this case is simple and devastating. A family just wanted to know where their loved one was. They wanted closure, safety, and truth. But instead, they walked into a situation where truth had been replaced by explanations, and explanations had been replaced by avoidance, and when avoidance breaks, what spills out is rarely clean. So let us set the stage. A rural property, a man who lived there, known to family as steady, consistent, and easy to reach, a pattern of regular calls, regular check-ins, regular life. Then suddenly, silence days become weeks. Calls go unanswered, messages never delivered or never returned. And something else is wrong. The property is not empty. Other people have been living there, a father and an adult daughter, both connected to the missing man, both present on the land, both with access, and both with reasons to know more than they admit at first glance. Nothing screams emergency. That is the trap. Most of the worst cases do not announce themselves. They whisper, they hide behind normal. But law enforcement does not have the luxury of trusting normal when the timeline breaks, when deputies respond to an earlier incident. They meet the father and the daughter on the property. The interaction is calm, cooperative, almost casual. The kind of interaction that ends with a warning and a deputy driving away, and hours later, the same property becomes the center of a missing person investigation. The missing man is the property owner. His family cannot reach him for days. Then weeks, they show up. His house feels wrong. They notice things missing. Items that matter. Items that do not simply walk away on their own. They mention that the people staying there are gone now. To left quickly, left without answers. And one thing about disappearances is this: adults can choose to leave. But patterns do not disappear without a reason. When a person vanishes in a way that breaks every habit, every routine, every relationship rhythm, investigators begin with the most basic question: what changed? Was there a conflict? Was there a threat? Was there a fear? Was there opportunity? Was there money? Was there control? And when the family says something else, that the father was seen acting strangely, carrying objects away, moving fast, grabbing tools, it raises the temperature, because tools are not just tools. Tools are intent. When someone is leaving in a hurry, investigators return with a warrant to search. They look through living spaces. They look through the basement, where the father was reportedly staying. They observe conditions that suggest chaos, instability, and possibly desperation. There are things that do not match the story of a man simply leaving town, and when stories do not match, investigators stop listening to words and start watching behavior. They find items that look suspicious, but nothing definitive yet. So they expand the search. Outside, a trained canine team arrives. They walk the property. They stop near an object that appears like a marker, something that could suggest a grave site, and the dog alerts. That alert changes everything for a moment, because an alert is not proof, but it is a signal that the investigation is no longer just a missing person file on a desk. It is now potentially a death investigation. But then an explanation appears. The family says the marker is not connected to the missing man. It was placed there for unrelated reasons. It could hold scent from another location. A false alert is possible. And that is one of the cruel realities of investigation. Sometimes the evidence points and then pulls away, forcing everyone to keep walking in the dark. Meanwhile, investigators pursue the other people who were living there. Where did they go? Why did they leave? Why did they leave right after deputies were there? Why did the family see them acting like they were packing for an emergency? And then the first real break, a vehicle connected to the father, is located on another property and inside. A tool that was reportedly taken from the missing man's home. Now we are no longer in coincidence territory. Because coincidence does not keep showing up with the same names attached. Investigators trace the father to a nearby home where family members live. They find him, they speak to him, they arrest him on an unrelated warrant to secure the moment. And then they start asking the only question that matters. Where is the missing man? The father answers with uncertainty and soft denials. He claims the missing man talked about leaving, talked about being depressed, talked about vanishing, and it sounds like the beginning of a narrative designed to push the missing man into a self-chosen disappearance. But the problem is this. If someone disappears voluntarily, they usually take what matters most. They do not leave behind key personal items while other people are selling their property. Moving televisions, moving weapons, moving tools. Investigators start finding the missing man's belongings in other hands. A television sold here, another television traded there, a firearm moved from person to person. Each transfer is and breadcrumbs are not just evidence of theft, they are evidence of time. They tell you when the decision to take began. And they tell you how quickly the decision spread, because when stolen items move fast, it often means the person who owned them is not expected to come back and ask for them. Investigators talk to neighbors, and neighbors are often the most honest witnesses. Because they have no reason to perform, they describe conflict, they describe fights, they describe threats, they describe a pattern of volatility. And then comes the detail that changes the frame. One neighbor mentions hearing repeated threats, threats to harm the missing man. Not once, not as a joke, but as a pattern. Now the investigation has motive indicators, conflict, threats, opportunity, and property movement. The father continues to speak in ways that feel carefully shaped. He describes the missing man in past tense, then corrects himself. He describes caring about him, but does not explain why he never called police to report him missing. Because that is what a normal person does when the property owner vanishes and you are living on his land. You call law enforcement. You protect yourself from suspicion, unless suspicion is the thing you are trying to outrun, and then the moment that investigators often wait for the mistake. The father begins to reveal something he cannot take back, not all at once, not in a clean confession, but in fragments that suggest he knows the missing man is not coming home. And as soon as law enforcement hears that, the case shifts from searching for a man to proving what happened to him. Now the daughter is brought in too, because whatever happened on that property, she was close to it. Investigators make it clear she is not under arrest. At first they want her to speak. They want to see where her story breaks. They advise her of rights. They set the tone. They ask direct questions. And here is where the psychology becomes important. In major cases, investigators are listening for three things: consistency, specificity, and emotional alignment. Consistency means the story stays the same when pressure increases. Specificity means the story contains verifiable details, not fog. Emotional alignment means the emotion fits the situation. People can be calm. Yes, but when someone is too detached from an objectively catastrophic event, investigators notice the daughter says the missing man was not a good person. She shows little concern for closure. She focuses on her father. She frames everything through him, and that tells investigators something vital. Her priority is not the missing man. Her priority is managing the fallout. Now let us transition to what matters most. The value what investigators do next. And why? Because this case is not just a story. It is a blueprint of how deception collapses under the weight of facts. To get how a case like this blows up, you've got to know one thing. Investigators don't chase theories. They chase timelines. A timeline is where lies get exposed. The father and daughter both claimed the missing man had talked about leaving, talked about disappearing. He talked about giving them the property, which sounds dramatic enough to be true. But it's also super vague and convenient. So detectives did what they always do. When someone introduces a narrative, they ask, prove it. Who did he say it to? When did he say it? What exactly did he say? Where were you standing when he said it? What were you doing right after he said it? What changed the next day? Because a real memory leaves marks. A fabricated memory leaves blur. While piecing together the timeline, investigators stumbled upon an important detail. A note, a handwritten note, that the father showed to someone a note, allegedly written by the missing man. It was framed like a confession, like a farewell, like an explanation that could close the case neatly. But a note is only as strong as its authenticity. And authenticity has patterns, handwriting, language, style, nicknames used or not used, the way a person signs their name, the way they structure a sentence. Family members said the note did not sound like him, it did not look like him, and when a note appears right around the time a person vanishes, and it does not match them, it becomes less like a clue and more like staging. Staging is one of the biggest red flags in any investigation, because staging implies fear of truth, and fear of truth often comes from involvement as detectives worked. They discovered property items missing, not random items, not junk items with value, televisions, weapons, tools. Those items started appearing in other places, connected to people who knew the father. One was sold, another was traded. Each handoff had a date, a conversation, a witness. And each witness added a layer to the timeline. Now the father had a problem if the missing man left voluntarily. Why were his belongings moving through the community like abandoned inventory if it was a suicide? Why were there sales, trades, and quiet transfers if it was a peaceful disappearance? Why did the father and daughter flee immediately after deputies arrived the first time? Investigators confronted the father with these contradictions. His answers were hesitant, shifting, and defensive, and then he made another mistake. He spoke about the missing man as if the outcome was already final. He did not talk like someone hoping the man returns. He talked like someone managing an aftermath. At the same time, investigators were hearing from other sources. Neighbors described the relationship between the two men as volatile. They argued like people trapped in a cycle. The missing man was described as someone who could fight back, someone who had his own issues. But he was still a person with a family who expected him to answer the phone. And then the case touched a deeper nerve. The daughter's background came into focus. She had been in foster care. She was reportedly not supposed to be in contact with her father for a period of time. That is not a detail investigators ignore, because it suggests history, instability, and potential control dynamics within the family. Investigators kept their focus, though first, locate the missing man. Second, prove what happened. Third, identify, because motive matters at trial, but it is not required to begin proving the mechanics of a crime. And in this case, the mechanics were beginning to show themselves. Investigators asked the daughter about her relationship to the missing man, about the conflict, about the last time she saw him, about what happened on the property. Her answers were narrow and guarded. She minimized, she deflected. She painted the missing man as the aggressor, and again, that is not proof, but it is pattern. When someone cannot tell a clean story, they often tell a story that spreads blame. Then investigators made the critical move. They separated the father and the daughter, because deception thrives in shared narratives. When two people are lying together, they can keep each other stable. When separated, their timelines drift, their details diverge, their stories develop. Fractures and fractures are where truth leaks out. Now we move into the turning point. Detectives asked the father to explain, step by step, what happened the day the missing man was last seen. The father described an altercation. He described a moment of perceived threat. He described a shooting. And here, we must be clear and responsible. This case is about loss, alleged abuse, and deep trauma. We're not here to make it sensational. We are here to understand how investigation exposes reality. The father said he shot to protect his daughter, painting himself as a hero instead of a villain. But self-defense claims require consistency, evidence, and behavior alignment afterward, and the behavior afterward is where everything began to collapse, even in a chaotic moment. What happens next can show true intent. Calling the police, that's what innocence looks like. Trying to erase time is what guilt does. Investigators asked about cleanup, about the house, about chemicals, about moved furniture. And then they discovered that someone had been inside after the alleged incident, rearranging things, moving items. The home did not look like a scene frozen in shock. It looked like a scene altered by planning. And detectives found witnesses who unknowingly helped, people who thought they were just assisting with moving things, not stepping into the orbit of a major crime. That is another pattern. Often, offenders get help without making it obvious, asking for simple favors like, "Can you move this?" or "Help me rearrange." And the helper does not realize they are helping bury truth at this stage. Detectives brought the father back to the property for a walkthrough. They asked him to show positions, distances, where people stood, where objects were because physical space is unforgiving. A story that sounds plausible in a chair often becomes impossible when mapped onto a room. The father walked them through it. He described where he stood, where the missing man stood, where the daughter stood, and then came the most important remaining question. Where is the body? Because a confession without remains is still a case. But it is a harder case. In some cases, bodies are hidden to avoid closure and stall justice. The father said he got rid of the remains. He described a method intended to erase evidence. Detectives searched areas connected to his account, and they found fragments consistent with human remains. Not enough to satisfy grief, not enough to reverse what happened, but enough to prove the missing man did not leave voluntarily. Enough to prove this was not a simple disappearance, enough to turn the entire case into what it truly was, a homicide investigation. Now the emotional weight becomes unavoidable because somewhere in the middle of paperwork and warrants, there is a family whose loved one is gone, a family who waited by the phone, a family who walked into a property and felt that something was wrong and they were right. Once investigators confirm that a missing person is dead, the next phase is both strategic and painful. They must prove the chain: who did what, who knew what, who helped, who lied, and why. In court, every detail counts. It's not just about what happened, but also what was hidden and by whom. In this case, the cover-up was not a solo act in the eyes of law enforcement. Even if just one person pulled the trigger, hiding the truth takes time, access, and sometimes a little help. Maybe not always active help, but definitely some passive protection. Silence, a place to hide, a family member who avoids eye contact when they should speak. Investigators soon realized they were tangled in a web of half-truths involving the father's immediate family. The people who bought property items, the people who helped move furniture, the people who provided shelter after the disappearance, and the daughter, who sat in interviews with a posture that suggested she knew more than she would say. Detectives asked a question that can feel uncomfortable to an outsider: was there anything inappropriate happening in this environment? They asked because of prior reports, because of foster care history, because of rumors from the community, because of how the father and daughter behaved, because of what others claim to have seen or heard. Motive in cases like this often hides in secrets that people would go to great lengths to protect. These questions are crucial, not for gossip or shock, but to uncover true motives and coercion. If someone is being controlled, their lies may be fear. If someone is participating, their lies may be strategy. Detectives zoomed in on one key issue. The relationship between the missing man, his father, and daughter was rocky. There were arguments, threats, and even gunshots reported nearby. When violence becomes normal in a place, the line between warning shots and a final act becomes thin. And then there was another layer. Why did the missing man not want the daughter to leave with her father? Why did conflict center around her? Why did the father frame himself as protector of her? Why did the daughter show such loyalty to him even while the investigation tightened in interviews? The daughter painted the missing man as a bad person in every way. That kind of sweeping statement is often a shield. It removes nuance. It creates a justification blanket. If the missing man is entirely bad, then anything done to him feels easier to rationalize. But investigators do not accept moral summaries as evidence. They ask for specifics. What did he do? When did he do it? Who else saw it? Did you tell anyone? Did you seek help? Did you call police? Did you leave? And here, the daughter's answers did not create clarity. They created fog at the same time. Detectives uncovered signs that family members of the father may have been told something, not necessarily everything, but enough to know a crime occurred. This is where obstruction enters, because when someone learns a homicide occurred and they do not report it, and instead they help hide evidence or hide a weapon, they become part of the case. Detectives visited family homes connected to the father. They served warrants. They asked direct questions. Where is the weapon? Who had it? When did you get it? Who gave it to you? What did you know when you got it? And they found it. They recovered the suspected weapon, and the people connected to it became witnesses or potential defendants. Depending on what they knew, one family member refused to answer certain questions. That refusal is not proof of guilt, but it signals that truth is not simple inside this family. That fear is present, that loyalty is present, or both. Now, the investigation turned toward the disposal of remains. The father described a method meant to erase evidence. Detectives searched locations. They located human remains consistent with the missing man. They also found indicators that additional efforts were made to destroy identifying evidence. This matters because it speaks to intent. A spontaneous act is one thing, a planned, time-consuming, evidence-destroying effort is another. And in the eyes of the law, it often separates panic from consciousness of guilt. Detectives then confronted the daughter with questions about her role after the incident. Did she clean? Did she help move items? Did she assist with disposal? Did she lie to officers earlier? She minimized, she denied, but her earlier statements, plus other witness reports, plus the physical evidence, painted a different picture. Detectives did what they do best in tricky cases, zoomed out for a bigger picture. They looked at the daughter's communications. They looked at the father's communications. They looked at patterns of contact and control. They examined who was calling whom, who was messaging whom, and what was being discussed around the timeline of disappearance in parallel. The daughter was arrested on obstruction-related charges, not for the homicide itself, but for actions that blocked the investigation and helped hide truth. Now, here is the hardest part to handle with integrity. This case includes allegations of exploitation and abuse. When investigators uncovered that, the story shifted from a homicide case to a case that exposed a deeply unhealthy environment, one where the daughter's autonomy may have been compromised, one where coercion may have existed, one where the missing man may have been positioned as either a threat to the secret, a participant in conflict, or both. And this is where many viewers feel a heavy question: why did no one intervene sooner? Why did the system not stop it? Why did neighbors not call? Why did family not speak up? But real life does not move like a movie in real life. People ignore what they do not want to believe. They normalize what they should fear. They dodge what needs facing, until a disaster brings the truth out. This is also where the investigation becomes painfully human. Detectives aren't just hunting for a suspect. They're piecing together a life filled with lies and chaos. A life where a young person's story is tangled with trauma, drugs, and loyalty to the person who may have harmed her. A life where another man ended up dead, and the explanation for why might never be fully clean. But the prosecution does not need a clean explanation. They need a provable sequence of events. They need evidence, they need admissions, they need corroboration, and they had it by the time this case moved toward court. The father faced life-altering charges connected to homicide and evidence tampering. The daughter faced years of incarceration for obstruction and tampering, and other family members faced consequences for hiding information or delaying reporting. Still, even with convictions, one truth remained. Some questions would never be fully answered. Why that day? Why that moment? Why did the father cross the final line? Was it conflict? Was it jealousy? Was it fear of exposure? Was it control? Was it a collapsing secret? Investigators believed the motive likely centered around the daughter and what the missing man allegedly knew, suspected, or threatened to reveal. That's what makes this case hit so hard. It's not just about a missing man. It's about the lengths people go to when their secrets are at risk. It is about what people will do when they believe their secret is about to be seen. There is a moment in every major case where the facts stop feeling like facts and start feeling like a mirror. A mirror held up to human nature, to fear, to denial, to the ability of a person to live beside something terrible and call it normal. This is that moment because by now, the basic outline is clear. A man disappeared. The people closest to his property left quickly. His belongings were sold and scattered. A story was introduced that he chose to leave a note, appeared that did not match him then. Under pressure, the story shifted into an account of violence and disposal, and evidence supported that he was dead. But the deeper horror is not only the crime, it is the environment that allowed it to build a volatile household dynamic. A community hearing fights and threats for months or years. A young woman whose life was marked by instability, foster care history, substance use, an attachment to a father who appeared to control the narrative, a missing man who may have been isolated on his own property, surrounded by a situation he could not manage, and possibly trapped in a conflict that was no longer just arguments, but something darker. Investigators did not just see a crime scene. They saw a pattern of escalation, and escalation always leaves clues. The father and the missing man fought the community, knew the family, knew there was tension, and yet nobody believed the final line would be crossed. Because people often believe tragedy only happens elsewhere, not on their road, not on that property, not inside a house they have driven past 100 times. But the truth is this: Violence rarely begins with violence. It begins with normalization, normalization of threat language, normalization of intimidation, normalization of control, normalization of chaos, until the day it becomes irreversible in interviews. Detectives kept returning to the same theme. Why did you not call police when he vanished? Why did you stay there? Take property, sell items, and tell nobody. If you believed he left voluntarily, why not protect yourself by reporting it immediately? If you believed he was depressed, why not ask for a welfare check if you believed he gave you permission? Why not show evidence? And when there is no evidence, the only thing left is intention. Investigators also focused on the emotional contradictions. The daughter described the missing man as evil, but could not give clear facts. She acted as if closure did not matter. But closure is what innocent witnesses want. She protected her father's image, even as evidence tightened around him, and the father, who framed himself as protector, did not act like a protector afterward. He acted like a person trying to erase time, erase items, erase questions, erase presence. And then, the secondary layer, the people around them, family members who heard fragments, who were told just enough to stay quiet, but not enough to feel responsible. That is how secrets survive, in fragments, in half-sentences, in coded language, in family loyalty, until law enforcement turns the lights on. Now, imagine what the missing man's family experienced. They called, no answer. They waited, no answer. They drove to the property and saw his life disturbed. They saw strangers living inside what should have been his safe place. They saw signs that something was taken, and they felt that fear every family fears. What if I am too late? And that fear is why these cases matter. Because a missing person case is not only about the missing person, it is about what the living have to carry when truth is withheld. Every day of silence becomes its own kind of cruelty. This is why obstruction is not a minor charge, because obstruction extends suffering. It delays grief. It prevents closure. It forces the family to live in uncertainty longer than they should. And it forces investigators to burn time proving what should have been admitted in the beginning. Now we reach the dopamine drop, the emotional peak. The case is not just about what happened on that property. It is about what you do when your instincts warn you. It is about what happens when you ignore warning signs because confronting them is uncomfortable. It is about the moment you realize that comfort is not safety in many true crime cases. The biggest lesson is this: if something feels off, it is off. If a story is too convenient, it is because it was built to be convenient. If a person cannot provide specifics, it is because specifics are dangerous to them. If someone vanishes, and the people closest to them are immediately selling their belongings, you are not looking at a disappearance. You are looking at a transfer of life, from a person who used to own it, to people who believe that person will never return. And if this message is landing heavy on you, if it is making you think about patterns you have seen, the small red flags people dismiss, then hear this clearly. If this message touched you, subscribe. Not for me, but for you. Because if this resonated, it is because you are ready for more. Because you are not watching this just to be shocked. You are watching to understand reality, to sharpen your discernment, to learn the difference between tragedy and manipulation, to see how truth behaves under pressure. Now, with the emotional peak behind us, we move toward resolution. The father was convicted and sentenced severely. Daughter faced years for her role in obstruction and tampering. Other family members faced legal consequences for silence and delayed reporting. And still, even with a sentence, the case left a residue, a question mark where motive should have been, a missing clarity about the exact date of death, a missing clarity about who knew what and when. And that is the haunting reality of many cases. Justice can be delivered without complete understanding. The law can punish actions without explaining every reason behind them, because reasons live in minds. And minds can stay silent, but the story still teaches. It teaches that crimes often create circles. The inner circle knows the most, says the least, the middle circle suspects, but avoids the outer circle, hears rumors, but these, until the evidence arrives and forces everyone to face what they were trying not to see. When folks think of true crime, they usually see the crime itself as the real horror. The moment someone disappears, the moment police arrive, but the deeper horror is often what happens before the slow build-up, the quiet acceptance, where a community expects chaos and calls it just another day. Because this case did not begin when the missing man vanished. It began years earlier. In the moments no one recorded, the fights that became routine, the threats people heard, and later tried to forget. The instability that made everything feel unpredictable and the secrets that made honesty impossible. And here is the final truth that stays with you. The people involved did not only try to hide what happened, they tried to rewrite reality and note a story about leaving. A narrative of depression, a framing of self-defense, a shifting timeline. Those are not just lies. They are attempts to control what everyone else is allowed to believe, and when someone tries to control reality, it is because the real reality is unbearable to them. So, what do we do with a story like this? We do not consume it like entertainment and move on. Untouched, we let it train our eyes. We let it sharpen our instincts. We let it remind us that warning signs matter, even when they are awkward to acknowledge. If someone disappears and the people closest to their life begin distributing their belongings, that is not grief. That is strategy. If someone cannot give clear answers about basic time, that is not confusion. That is concealment or fear. If a person acts more concerned about controlling the narrative than finding the missing person, that is not shock, that is management. And here is the metaphor that fits this case. Some people do not bury bodies. First, they bury truth. First, they bury it under stories, under excuses, under half-confessions, under family loyalty, under the hope that time will wash it away. But time does not wash away truth. Time only hardens it, and eventually truth rises the way pressure rises in a sealed room. It finds the smallest crack, then forces itself through. That is what happened here. A missing man's family refused to accept silence. Detectives refused to accept convenient explanations. Property transfers created a timeline witness. Statements created pressure. Contradictions created fractures. And the fractures became openings for the truth, even if not every motive was perfectly known. The reality was proven, and proven reality is what justice is built on. So let me leave you with a question that lingers. How many cases begin this way, with conflict everyone knows about, and nobody believes will end in tragedy? And how many tragedies could be prevented if we stopped calling red flags normal? If you want to keep going deeper into cases where the smallest details changed everything, I recommend you watch the next video on this channel, where we break down another investigation step by step, focusing on the moment the story collapses and the truth takes over. Because once you learn how to see patterns, you cannot unsee them. And that is not paranoia, that is discernment. If you want, I can also generate for this exact script, in English, a full package in the true life Taylor style, a suggested title set, a description optimized for search, and 20 to 30 tags designed specifically to rank in suggested videos.